Why do people assume, because I'm an atheist, I hate people that are religious? I'm an atheist because I'm an atheist. And yeah, that's a circular statement, but atheist exactly means without religion, a person who disbelieves or lacks belief in the existence of God. But there's an army of fuckwits still out there that insist that as an atheist, I can't defend a Muslim when some bigot on the far right white attacks them. Am I defending Islam? No, I'm defending a human. Just as I would defend anyone that was being attacked by anybody else because of their religion or their skin color or their sexuality or their choice of sportsball team. We are an animal that's so stupid and so xenophobic that we want to hurt people that are different than us. We want to condemn 1 billion people because some people that believe in a God believe in a slightly different manner than the other people do. So we want to condemn them and we want to hurt them and we want them extinguished. The same as the people that support the team with the one coloured shirt want to commit violence on the supporters of the team in the other coloured shirt. And this isn't hyperbole. This happened last week at the soccer and there were children in the stands watching this violence. And you want to know the most pathetic part of all of this? The guys playing the sports ball in the one coloured shirt for the right money and without any guilt or regret, the very next week will go and play for the team in the other coloured shirt. And the sports ball fans that just last week were wanting their skin will now want to get their autograph. And they'll treat them as a hero and they'll worship them. And they all insist that their children do the same. Guy Martin said, football is 2 hours wasted watching 22 millionaires chasing a bag of wind in their underwear. Jason Jones said, religion is a lifetime wasted arguing with bags of meat that your God has the right coloured shirt on. Okay, yeah, so sorry everyone, this is going to be one of those Jason is pissed off at everything shows. Don't blame me if you turn off now. There's a new Incredulous out this week. It's a rare occasion, so I wouldn't blame you if you stopped and went to listen to that. Okay, so still some people here. Well, Andy is off with her family today, so I've had to bring in another co-host. Say hello.
Hi, this is a voiceover robot. If you want to have each new podcast delivered as soon as it's released, go to skepticsmashtalk.com and subscribe.
Okay, so this next story comes from Pink News and The Guardian, and it reads, the BBC has warned production companies it won't commission shows unless they employ a representative amount of ethnic minorities, the disabled, and LGBT people. The Guardian reports that the broadcaster set out diversity guidelines for independent production companies last week. And they've put the onus on production companies to ensure representation of ethnic minorities, the disabled, and LGBT people, both on screen and behind the camera. It adds that the new diversity criteria will be considered when green-lighting new shows. The guidelines say we now expect each commission to be doing everything it can to meet these guidelines. The positive steps that you plan to take to address underrepresentation will be factored into commissioning discussions ahead of productions being green-lit. BBC Director of Content Charlotte Moore said, the BBC's future depends on remaining relevant to all of our licence fee payers and reflecting modern Britain in an authentic way. Audiences will stay tuned if they feel their lives and aspirations are being reflected both now and in the future. The new internal BBC diversity rules set out earlier this year committed to 8% of on-screen stars and execs being LGBT by 2020 and 8% being disabled. The BBC also committed to half of roles being filled by women by 2020, but the government have claimed the broadcaster needs to go even further and ensure 10% of its employees are LGBT. The then Culture Secretary, John Whittingsdale, threatened punishments for the BBC unless it met targets of 15% of senior leadership roles for BAME, and that's Black, Asian and minority ethnic people, 10% LGBT and 8% disabled by 2020. But critics have pointed out that just 5% of Tory MPs are BAME, 4% are LGB, and none are transgender. Okay, let's break this down a little bit. And I need to get this out of the way to start with, and I need to make this really, really clear. I support this in principle 100%. It has some problems, and don't take what I'm about to say as me hating on anyone or anything. We absolutely need to do this, but we need to understand that there are problems that are going to arise. And I think it's brilliant and welcome, but we need to remember that TV is meant to be entertainment. So writing in a diverse character only to get the show approved will be a complete waste of time. And I think this is a problem that will arise, as it does whenever you make a golden rule. Whenever you make a rule, someone will find a way to get around it or find a loophole. You can imagine it. In fact, you don't have to imagine it. The BBC are guilty of this whenever they call for diversity. And anyone that's seen the BBC Big Question on Sunday mornings will have seen them bring on the bisexual, half-Muslim, half-Wiccan rabbinical snake handler with social anxiety disorder to talk about how they use interpretive dance to overcome their several eating disorders, even though the topic of the day is funding for potholes. And I'm not completely kidding here. Watch it. And I can't say this loud enough. I support this move. I support it, but in principle. But just using numbers or percentages can be very problematic. And if we look at the demographics of the kingdom, and I'll get to this in a minute, but to get accurate figures of the LGBT community is very problematic. But according to the government statistics, 5 to 6% of the population identify as LGBT. But the then Culture Secretary is looking for 10% in senior roles and 15% of BMAE also in senior positions, which is about the same as the demographic in the BAME community in the UK. But then when we get to the disabled workers, they are asking for 8%. Now, depending on who you ask, you might learn that 20% of the working population self-identify as disabled. But when you turn to the bodies that represent the disabled, they will tell you that less than about 20% of disabled are in the full-time workforce. And depending on the disability, these figures can be significantly lower. Today it was released that in the autistic community, 16% of people with diagnosed autism are in full-time work. So to the skeptic's eye, it looks as though they have taken these figures straight from outside of their rectum. But then how about taking into consideration the types of industries that tend to appeal to certain demographic groups? And this is going to sound a little bigoted. It's not. It's not meant to be. Don't take it the way. This is based on facts. I'm not defending the facts. They are just facts. Okay. Let's talk about the HR as an industry. In the US, according to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, it tells us that 72% of people working in HR are female and about 35% are from ethnic minorities. But when it comes to taxi and limo services, only 12.5% of workers are women, and 65% of those workers are Black or Asian or Latino. So if we use a similar model to what the BBC are asking for with regards to ethnic minorities, in one industry you will have a much lower rate of representation than the other. But what about gender and the glass ceiling? We do hear a great deal about this when it comes to the glass ceiling and gender equality in the UK, and even to the point where governments have looked to legislate for a percentage of women in senior management positions. But using the same data sources before, when you look at the gender split between childcare and coal mining, for instance, one industry has 95% of its workforce as men, and the other has about 95% of its workforce as women. And it doesn't matter which one is which. But to say that either should have 25% or 50% of its senior management to be a particular gender is just dumb. It should be proportionate. And I know that it is not. When I worked in hospitality, I was the minority, a straight male in hospitality, but senior management were all straight men. Look at retail. Believe it or not, it's nearly a 50-50 split on the gender lines, but a vast majority of customer-facing staff are women, when the majority of men are working in warehousing, but the vast majority of management in retail are men. My point here is that it needs to be proportional. And I haven't really used the LGBT statistics because they are so hard to come by, especially in labour market statistics. But I hope you get my point. Staffing and management diversity needs to be proportionate for the population. And that's the local population, not countrywide. I'll get to that shortly, but more so proportionate for that industry. And you can even flip it around. And you have to be very careful when you do this. It can backfire and make you sound like a right twat. Take the All Lives Matter troglodytes, for example. But it's a good exercise when you're practicing your critical thinking and philosophy skills. And by this, I mean when you make a statement, think about it if the statement was flipped around. So if we, for example, say that a board of directors should have at least 25% women, how does that sentence compare to the sentence of a board of directors cannot have more than 75% men? Mathematically, it's the same thing, right? But the message is completely different. The message should always be that the workforce, including senior management, needs to be representative of the population, and that's the local population. But why is this important? Okay. If you haven't noticed by my accent, I'm an Australian and I live in the UK. On this statistic alone, I represent 1 in every 650,000 residents of the kingdom. But if we only use proportions of population in legislation for workplace demographics, we have a problem. And I use this number as it's large enough to show the effect. We're not talking about reality now. It's the same as a spherical chicken in a vacuum. If we go outside the bounds of reality and use examples like this, reality really starts to make sense. So put your imagination hats on for a moment and pretend that 2 businesses are starting up. Each will have 650,000 workers. One of the businesses is located in London and the other is located in a shitty little town halfway betwixt Manchester and Liverpool. The government of the day has legislated for equality and diversity, and because of our really cool and soothing accents, the government has legislated that 1 in every 65,000 workers must be Australian. Well, that's pretty easy to sort out for the London-based business, as nearly every Australian living in the UK lives within a commune of London. In fact, 90% of Australians in the UK live near London, with about 9% in Scotland, probably all working in bars, and the rest in Wales and Northern Ireland, probably drinking in bars. But for the businesses located halfway between Manchester and Liverpool, their choice is simple. Hire me by virtue of my birth and soothing accent, or suffer the wrath of the government. Worse than that, because I'm the only Australian in the village, I'm all of a sudden a very expensive commodity who manages to work his way to the boardroom with the rest of the statistics. So with this in mind and flipping the question around, is it reasonable to insist that 90% of all lumberjacks be heterosexual? While you ponder that, let's go back to the BBC. I would rather that producers make the shows, even reality shows, if they must, that show diverse groups, no matter who or what they are, as a part of society, and not just the good parts of society. We know that nearly 1 in every 2 transgender people will attempt suicide. We know that gay and lesbians in the community have higher rates of depression and anxiety. And we know that adult men with ADD are more likely to drive antisocially and are more likely to use drugs in a high-risk environment. So, For example, what is the point of insisting that producers include a transgender character if there's nothing done to highlight the social problems or the societal problems that they face? The same with disabled characters. Now, we do see them occasionally, and to be fair, all the ones that I can think of off the top of my head have been on the BBC anyway. But for instance, if there's a character in a wheelchair, do you ever see the character struggling to get in and out of their chair, or to get themselves up if the chair's rolled over, or crossing a road, or getting in or out of a shop? No, what you see is a character is just another character, with the writers and producers doing all they can to make the character seem as normal as possible, because that's what they think everyone wants to see. Or they're trying to get society to see minorities as a normal part of society, which we should do. And I honestly think they are doing that exactly for the right reason. I think they think that if we make characters look normal, people will see them as normal. But that's bullshit. Okay, maybe that's what people do want to see, but it's not what they need to see. Why don't they ever show the reality of what the LGBT community actually go through every day? Why don't they show the ugliness of homophobia? Why don't we see real life? Why don't they show the ugliness of bigotry? And if you want to produce a reality TV show ad nauseum, then do us a favour and make it real. Better yet, if the TV is going to raise generations of children post-gestation, then it has to show the truth. Don't just add in LGBT characters and call them in when the plot needs an interior decorator or a male bestie for a group of 20-something woo girls or a lumberjack. The thing is, there is one thing that the bigots and the haters won't ever understand or accept. Underneath our skin, we are all made out of the same thing. All the parts are the same, and in some cases, interchangeable. Granted, some better than others, but if I need a top-up of A-positive blood, it doesn't matter if that comes from a doppelganger or the bisexual half-Muslim, half-Wiccan rabbinical snake handler with social anxiety disorder, just as long as he or she does not have any A antibodies. We can share blood very easily, as can 85% of the population. And we may even be able to swap out our kidneys or our lungs or our hearts. Okay, that type of matching is a little bit more difficult, but that's got nothing to do with mine or their sexual preferences or their neurodiversity or their chosen religion. Think of it this way. No matter who you are, no matter where you were born, no matter how you want to dress, no matter if you have a mental or physical condition, no matter if you are sexually attracted to men or women or a different combination of men or women or robots, every one of us, except for the robots, have one thing in common. Every one of us, mostly when we were babies, put our hands down our nappies and spread a handful of shit on the wall. And don't say that you didn't. You did. We all did it. We all smeared shit on the walls. We are the planet of shit smearers, and we need to look out for each other. Why don't you go and put that on a t-shirt? Okay, this is probably going to be a longer story than it needs to be, but the lead up to it is just as important as the rest. And it's about a little tete-a-tete that happened yesterday that still absolutely blows my mind. And just to confuse the issue even more, we need to start in the middle. So, I spend a lot of time talking and mocking the far right white for their insanity, but there's also the other end of the spectrum, the far left, the social justice warriors, the ones that are there to correct you when you use the wrong pronoun. And to be honest, I leave them alone out of some sort of familiar respect, but sometimes they just can't be ignored. For instance, when I was at QED, I was in a conversation with some people, and who it was and what it was about is not important, but the gist of the conversation was me recalling a conversation that I had with another group. Actually, the conversation wasn't what I was regaling, it was who I had the conversation with, and I was saying that there are very few places that some gigantic Australian can have an intelligent conversation on scientific discovery with a blind black man, a trans lady, and an American without anyone looking at the group is if we were the start of some shit 1990s joke. And while the rest of my audience nodded, one person looked at me with scorn and said, "Woman, it's trans woman." And I let that go, and I couldn't be fucked. But rather than look at the story for what it was, this person was waiting for something to be pissed off about. And look, we know this type of fundamentalist left exists, but in most part, they do little harm. And so what if they want to feel superior by ensuring everybody is semantically correct? But there are times when they need to understand that words are just words. And in most cases, especially in our community, they never intend to harm someone. Okay, that said, let's confuse things even more and go to the beginning of yesterday's story. Remember the Arab Spring in 2011 and similar events after that? Well, the one way, and I think the most effective way that people were able to communicate in and out of the Middle East was via Twitter and other social networks. But when they took the Wi-Fi networks and the broadband down, they were able to find dial-up connections, for whatever reason was still active, and use these to communicate in and out. And the importance of this was phenomenal. Alongside this, there are countries that don't share the freedoms that you and I do. Look at North Korea. They can only officially access about 28 websites. China blocks a lot of social networks and a shit ton of media sites, including mine, in case you're wondering. Russia does similar, but for some reason lets my website in. And I could go on, but just be assured that any government that has a hankering for oppression blocks certain parts of the internet and the web as a whole. But there are ways around this. And as I said before, when they took down the internet during the Arab Spring, dial-up services appeared. And even here in jolly old England, if I want to watch John Oliver online, I need to use a VPN. Then there is Tor, and there's other tools that enable you to get into the dark web. But then there are simple things like RSS feeds or seemingly innocuous websites that look like a 14-year-old girl's MySpace page, but link into news tickers. And as far as getting the news out to the world, these sites are massively important. And I'll bring this up later on when I get to listener feedback, but I was contacted by a listener who lives in a country that has these great firewalls, who is still able to access this podcast and others for that matter, because we post them to Twitter or send them to aggregators. But more importantly than being able to listen to me talk crap and get angry, they get to access news that their governments are blocking. And yet I hear it. I hear myself. It all sounds all a bit conspiracy theory. But I promise you, spend a few hours talking with a refugee. Ask them why their mobile devices are so important. Anyway, that's why I try and post as much news content as I can on the social networks. And that's why you should do the same. Anyway, so yesterday I'm doing this. I'm sharing as much breaking news as I think is right, mostly about the US election and the FBI debacle. When I was kind of expected this would happen anyway, the Trumpodites jumped in to do their best to troll me. And somebody in India, of all places, jumped on board with a heap of anti-Muslim rhetoric, although I think he was actually a bot. I'm still not too sure. Anyway, if you've been caught in that troll/bigot/loop, what they try and do is get all their fellow bridge dwellers to come at you at the same time. If you don't bite, they tend to drop off pretty quickly. It's no fun for them. I generally suggest that they take some sort of sexual gratification at my voice, and they normally bugger off pretty quick. Anyway, so yesterday, some troglodytes are troglodyting with no luck. One of them tells me they're putting my name on their list and quite promptly buggers off. Anyway, someone tweets back to me, the make a vague threat and act like you're stupid for acknowledging it tactic, and used by tards with nothing to say, to which I gave a lols and thought nothing more of it. Okay, so that's all the background of the story out of the way. As I said, a lols and I thought nothing more. That was until someone, and I'm not going to use names or anything here, it's just not worth it, but somebody decided that what was said was offensive, and it was up to me to defend them. In fact, this person sent a tweet telling me that I should tell the person that tweeted the tweet originally to stop using ableist terms. And you can imagine my response to that. Okay, well, you don't have to. You can read it on Twitter. But I was dumbfounded. Even more so, after a bit of back and forward, the person that was offended with labels and offended by the word tard told the world that I'm an ableist. Actually, in their own words, I was a piece of ableist shit. Now, how's that for ironic, Alanis Morissette? Someone offended with labels insults me with a label. Anyway, nothing I said could convince this person that because she was on some sort of crusade, I didn't have to be offended. Especially when the guy that used the T word, well, for want of a better term, was backing me up. He had my Twitter back. And before I go on, let's just look at the definition of ableist or ableism. In the dictionary, it's defined as discrimination in favour of able-bodied people. Fair enough, and I'll continue to fight until my last breath to stop discrimination in favour of any other person. But words on a tweet are not discrimination. And as I tried and obviously failed to explain, I would rather a million words to all the scars and broken bones. Anyway, forget the dictionary. What does the true oracle say? From Wikipedia, ableism is discrimination and social prejudice against people with disabilities. Ableism characterizes persons as defined by their disabilities and as inferior to the non-disabled. Okay, so let's forget about the tweet now. Look at the person, the social justice warrior, the person that calls himself literally an autism champion. Obviously, they don't grasp this. Ableism characterizes persons as defined by their disabilities. It's a fact that I have disabilities, but do these disabilities define me? Well, fuck no. I am me, and nothing and no one will ever define who or what I am. Think about it. To do so would mean exactly what the super mega lefty social justice warriors claim to be defending against, whilst at the very same time calling me a piece of ableist shit. This person defined me. Moreover, this person has decided on my behalf what I can and cannot be offended by. As a social justice warrior, this person has decided that they are better than me, and I need them to tell me how I should think and feel and react. And if I don't agree with them, they call me a piece of shit. Very fucking ironic indeed.
Hello, it is me again, the voiceover robot, while he has his blood pressure tablets. Don't forget to go to skepticsmashtalk.com for show notes and contact details. Also, don't you think my voice is more soothing than Jason's?
Okay, so last week we talked about the model whose death was linked to some chiropractic treatment that she had, which raised one very big question. What exactly is chiropractic? Well, so from Wikipedia, chiropractic is a form of alternative medicine concerned with the diagnosis and treatment of mechanical disorders of the musculoskeletal system, especially the spine, under the belief that such a disorder affects general health via the nervous system. The main chiropractic treatment technique involves manual therapy, especially manipulation of the spine, other joints and soft tissues, but may also include exercise and health and lifestyle counseling. The specific focus of chiropractic is chiropractic subluxation, a form of pseudoscience. Okay, so when I generally explain that to anybody, the very next question I'm often asked is, does it work? Well, as you may have guessed, there is no good evidence that chiropractic is effective for the treatment of any medical condition, except perhaps for some certain kinds of back pain. Generally, the research carried out into the effectiveness of chiropractic has been of very poor quality. Numerous controlled clinical studies of treatment used by chiropractors have been conducted with conflicting results. Research published by chiropractors is distinctly biased. For reviews of spinal manipulation for back pain, chiropractic authors tend to have positive conclusions, while others, non-chiropractic authors that is, do not show any effectiveness. There is a wide range of ways to measure treatment outcomes. Chiropractic care, like all medical treatment, benefits from the placebo response. It's difficult to construct a trustworthy placebo for clinical trials of spinal manipulative therapy, as experts often disagree about whether a proposed placebo actually has no effect. The efficacy of maintenance care in chiropractic is unknown, and by maintenance care, this means the regular visit to your local chiropractor where there's really nothing concerning you, but you go anyway to make sure everything is okay. So let's go back and look at the history of chiropractic. Chiropractic was founded in 1895 by Daniel David, or D.D. Palmer, in Davenport, Iowa. Palmer, a magnetic healer, hypothesized that manual manipulation of the spine could cure disease. The first chiropractic patient of D.D. Palmer was Harvey Lillard, a worker in the building where Palmer's office was located. He claimed that he had severely reduced hearing for 17 years, which started soon following a pop in his spine. A few days following his adjustment, Lillard claimed his hearing was almost completely restored. Chiropractic competed with its predecessor, osteopathy, another medical system based on magnetic healing and bone setting. Both systems were founded by charismatic Midwesterners in opposition to the conventional medicine of the day, and both postulated that manipulation improved health. Although initially keeping chiropractic as a family secret, in 1898, Palmer began teaching it to a few students at his new Palmer School of Chiropractic. One student, his son, Bartlett Joshua, or BJ Palmer, became committed to promoting chiropractic. He took over the Palmer School in 1906 and rapidly expanded its enrollment. Early chiropractors believed that all disease was caused by interpretations in the flow of innate intelligence, a term first used by the first chiropractors. They thought of it as a vitalistic nervous energy or a life force that represented God's presence in man. Chiropractic leaders often invoked religious imagery and moral traditions. DD and BJ both seriously considered declaring chiropractic a religion, which might have provided them legal protection under the US Constitution, but they had decided against this, partly to avoid confusion with Christian Science. Early chiropractors tapped into the populist movement, emphasizing craft and hard work and competition and advertisement, aligning themselves with the common man against intellectuals and trusts, among which they included the American Medical Association, or the AMA. And we see this today. Quite simply put, every branch of alternative medicine have jumped on this populist movement. But, as you can imagine, chiropractic has seen considerable controversy and criticism. Although DD and BJ were what they called straights and had a disdain for the use of instrument, some early chiropractors, who BJ scornfully called mixers, advocated for the use of instruments. In 1910, BJ changed course and endorsed X-rays as necessary for diagnosis. This resulted in a significant exodus from the Palmer School of the mostly conservative faculty and students. The mixer camp grew until by 1924, BJ estimated that only 3,000 of the 250,000 chiropractors in America remained straight. That year, BJ's invention and promotion of the neurocalometer, a temperature-sensing device, was highly controversial among BJ's fellow straights. By the 1930s, chiropractic was the largest alternative healing profession in the USA. BJ then went on to sell his neurocalometer as a piece of standard equipment to his graduating students. And he insisted that these students would need it to detect misalignments in the spine or pinched nerves. He sold the devices for up to 20 times the cost of manufacturing them. The price he sold these devices for at the time was about the same as the cost of a house in Iowa in the 1920s. Yet he sold more than 2,000 of them to his graduates of his college and to other chiropractors. After his father's death, BJ expanded the popularity of chiropractic by buying radio and TV stations to promote it. His first purchase in 1922 was the purchase of the radio station WOC, or Wonders of Chiropractic, in Davenport. He used the station to market chiropractic, among other things. A second station in Des Moines, WHO, with hands only, was purchased in 1930. Since its early days, chiropractic has fought for acceptance as a legitimate health profession. Chiropractors faced heavy opposition from actual doctors. Thousands of chiropractors were prosecuted for practicing medicine without a license, and many chiropractors were jailed. To defend against medical statutes, they argued that chiropractic was a separate and distinct form of medicine, claiming that chiropractors analyzed rather than diagnosed and adjusted subluxations rather than treating disease. And if you remember from 2 minutes ago, you'll remember that early chiropractors believed that all disease was caused by the interpretation of the flow of God in man. Let's break everything down into its simplest form. Chiropractic was invented. It wasn't a coming together of the great minds of the medical professionals of the day. It wasn't a conglomeration or symposium of proven treatments by the leading academics. It was invented. It was invented by D.D. Palmer, a beekeeper, a grocery store owner, a spiritualist, and a magnetic healing proponent. D.D.'s main tenet was that the spine somehow held the force that represented God's presence in man, and that this was where disease began. It was an interruption in what they coined as innate intelligence. This is what caused, if you'll pardon me, dis-ease. D.D. and his son BJ seriously considered declaring chiropractic as a religion in order to give them constitutional legal protection, which may have stopped D.D. Palmer from going to jail for practicing medicine without a license. In 1910, when B.J. Palmer endorsed using actual medical equipment like X-ray to help diagnose patients, many of his students and faculty from his school left. In the mid-20s, B.J. jumped on the medical instrument bandwagon and invented the neurocalometer to detect heat around the spine. Although it seems that the patent was granted, sales were actually dismal. Some proponents of chiropractic relate this to an assumed smear campaign directed towards chiropractors by the American Medical Association. Notwithstanding, in the 1930s, chiropractic became the most popular form of alternative medicine. But during this time, thousands of chiropractors were sent to jail for practicing medicine without a license. So in order to counter this so-called persecutions, many chiropractors argued that chiropractic was separate and distinct from medicine. They claimed that they analyzed, they claimed that they adjusted, they didn't treat, they didn't diagnose. The chiropractic vertebral subluxation complex is a historical and still only theoretical concept, and it is not supported by any clinical research or evidence that would allow claims to be made that is the cause of disease or health concerns. After its first 30 years, the drift was set from the hands-on holistic approach to graduate students needing to purchase an instrument that costs the same as a house at the time. Although now the instruments are still available, well, in the early 1990s anyway, chiropractors saw that this device was, well, in their words, the Canadian Chiropractic Consensus Conference concluded that paraspinal measurements with thermocouple devices has not been shown to have good discriminability, and both their validity and reliability of measurements are highly doubtful. In other words, they concluded it doesn't work. And this leads me to my conclusion. D.D. Palmer invented, well, let's just call it a system that in the age of pre-medical diagnostic equipment was easy to sell if you had the right patter and charisma. And all of this was at a time when antiseptic surgery was still in its infancy. At the same time, alternatives such as homeopathy were being invented also. So it was understandable, but not excusable, that in this new age of scientific discovery, the credulous were convinced. And to counter the evidence and to dispel the prevailing germ theory, the father and son of chiropractic jumped on the populist bandwagon. They said it's all big government. It's all big pharma. They want to control you. We, the chiropractors, are just working men and women just like you. We want to help you get well. They want to give you dis-ease. We want to make you better, etc. and so forth. And by the millions, people fell for the banter. And when you convince the people that the man's going to tell you that chiropractic doesn't work because he's the man and the man don't want you to be happy, well, you know what happened. And when the man prosecuted the chiropractors for practicing medicine without a license, they, the chiropractors, convinced the government that they were now not practicing medicine. They were analysing and adjusting, not treating, not diagnosing. Quite simply put, chiropractic as an industry changed its mind. But then come the diagnostic tools like X-ray that actually show inside the human bag of meat. The man can't control the X-rays. Not even Hillary Clinton has that power. So the son of chiropractic invents a tool that's better than X-ray and insists that all his graduates must use one, even convincing patients that if their chiropractor doesn't use a neurocalorimeter, to find one that does. So again, as an industry, from the beginnings of the chiropractor being the tool that located and removed all the evil from the body, remember that innate intelligence? Remember that DD and BJ believed that they were removing the blockages of the presence of God in man's body? Remember they wanted chiropractic to be a religion? Well, the advancement of medical knowledge surpassed them. So chiropractic, as an industry, changed its mind. Now it needed tools, and expensive tools at that. But in the 1990s, medical knowledge is better than ever before. And even the Canadian Chiropractic Conference concluded that the neurocalorimeter was useless. Again, chiropractic, as an industry, changed its mind. So what now of chiropractic? Well, as an industry, in the UK at least, chiropractic nearly saw its last days. Now, of course, I'm talking about the case of the British Chiropractic Association versus Simon Singh, where the BCA attempted and failed to silence its critics. In particular, Simon Singh, when he said this in his column in The Guardian. He wrote, "You might think that modern chiropractors restrict themselves to treating back problems, but in fact, they still possess some quite wacky ideas. The fundamentalists argue that they can cure anything, and even the more moderate chiropractors have ideas above their station. The British Chiropractic Association claims that their members can help treat children with colic, sleeping and feeding problems, frequent ear infections, asthma and prolonged crying, even though there is not a jot of evidence. This organisation is the respectable face of the chiropractic profession, and yet it happily promotes bogus treatments." So this case led to the changing of many minds, including the changing of legislation and libel reform in the UK. But again, chiropractic, as an industry, was forced to change its mind, with formal complaints of false advertising being made against more than 500 individual chiropractors within one 24-hour period, with the number later climbing to 1/4 of all British chiropractors. It also prompted the McTimney Chiropractic Association to write in a leaked message to its members advising them to remove leaflets that make claims about whiplash and colic from their practice, to be wary of new patients and telephone inquiries and telling their members, if you have a website, take it down now. And finally, they said, we strongly suggest you do not discuss this with others, especially your patients. One chiropractor is quoted as saying that suing Simon was worse than any Streisand effect, and chiropractors knew it and could do nothing about it. In response to demands that the British Chiropractic Association engage in scientific debate over its position, the BCA released a statement supposedly representing scientific evidence, but supported by just 29 citations. According to The Guardian, the article was ripped apart by bloggers within 24 hours of publication, before being subjected to a further shredding in the British Medical Journal. It emerged that 10 of the papers cited had nothing to do with chiropractic treatment, and several weren't even studies. The remainder consisted of a small collection of poor quality trials. More seriously, the BCA misled the public with a misrepresentation of one paper, a Cochrane review looking at the effectiveness of various treatments for bedwetting. In a new report, the General Chiropractic Council has disowned the claims of the BCA, the same claims that lie at the centre of its libel actions against Simon Singh. Notably, the report concludes that the evidence does not support claims that chiropractic treatment is effective for childhood colic, bedwetting, ear infections, or asthma, the very claims that Simon Singh was sued for describing as bogus. Come on, I know you want to say it with me. Let's do it together. On 3. 1, 2, 3. Chiropractic, as an industry, changed its mind. Okay, so as I said earlier, I had some feedback this week, and I really have to, for obvious reasons, anonymize this. And it's also had to go through Google Translate, so it's a little bit rough, but just bear with me. Anyway, the email reads, "Hi there. Thanks for the podcast. I would like to tell you that in my country, mocking religion is explicitly criminalized and some people have been put to death. We have had most of our sites blocked, but we can still find ways of accessing. Thanks for the RSS feed also. I want to promote science and skepticism and atheism in my country, but it's hard for us here. Please continue to help. I use Twitter anonymously and hope we can still get access. Please encourage everybody to keep posting news so that we can access it and retweet as much as possible so it comes to our feeds." And like I said, obviously that's been anonymized. So let's do that. Let's make sure that we can help and support the rest of the world and look outside of our little, very comfortable bubble. Okay, so just before we wind up, if you don't mind indulging me, I have a little bit of housekeeping before we finish off for the week. So, if you remember a few weeks back, Dave in Derby wrote in about the Twitter comp and correctly reminded me that not everybody uses Twitter. I've been trying to sort out a better way of communicating with the listeners, and the reason for this is so that I can let you know when I'm in the studio, just in case you want to Skype in and say hello and ask questions, sort of like a live show, but not quite live as I don't have the IT in place yet to do an actual live show, but you get my point. Now, I did try a forum on the skepticsmashtalk.com, but I talked about that also a little while ago. It's a lot of work keeping the trolls out. So basically, I needed to block everything that come in and filter the ones that I want to actually get posted to the site. And I don't think that's fair, as you may get the impression that I'm filtering genuine comments. So I'm well and truly open for suggestions, especially from the listeners that don't use the social medias. The best thing that I can think of at the moment is an email list, which I've set up anyway. It's always been on the website. And it's set up now. I'm sorry to do this, but it's set up as a pop-up. So if you go to skepticsmashtalk.com, you'll get a little pop-up that you can just put your email address in and you'll join that list. Now, if you don't want to, you just hit the cross and that will close down. I'll take that down very shortly, but I just needed that to be easy for people to get to. But the thing is with email lists is that they're really only good for one-way communication, and they really only work successfully if everybody subscribes. And I'll work all of that out, but if you have any other suggestions or ideas, let me know. Now, on that, well, similar to that, I'm getting together with a few podcasters, hopefully from around the globe, and we're just going to do a live panel type show live on YouTube. Now, the details for that will be announced, but essentially, hopefully, there'll be 4 to 6 of us just talking crap for however long it's interesting for. So far, I've got a guy in the USA that has a podcast on beer culture, and if the time zones align properly, we have a Russian that has a show on Eastern European rock music. And there'll be some more on that to be announced very soon as the dates and times will get set this week. And I'll let you know when that will be. But this is going to be a live broadcast, so anything can happen. And finally, for now anyway, last week I said that I wanted to raise a few $1,000s to get some books on critical thinking into some schools, hopefully next year. And this is where I need all of your help. And right now, I'm not asking for any money, so don't worry, that will come soon enough. And I understand more than most people, I assure you, that in the words of No Illusions, not everyone has the money to give money. So if you don't have the money to give money, there are still ways you can help. Now, before anything else, before nagging you incessantly for donations, I need to get the word out. And that's where everyone can help. I'm not asking for much at all. So chances are, if you enjoy listening to some grumpy Australian living in the UK, mostly talking about US politics and how shit homeopathy is and other random stuff that I find an urge to get pissed off about, some of your friends will be of the same ilk. Hopefully, for your own sanity, all of them will be very similar. So what am I getting at? As it stands right now, well, I have more weekly regular listeners than I would have ever imagined. I'm still completely humbled by the numbers and the feedback, and in comparison to the more popular podcasts, my listenership is minuscule. When you compare to, say, This American Life, 6.5 million monthly subscribers to my 200 or so, it's chalk and cheese. But on the advice of somebody that does not even know that he's become my podcasting mentor, I imagine myself in a room with 200 people listening to me talk, and in most part agreeing or laughing or shedding a tear. And I ask myself, if I were a musician, money and fame aside, would I prefer to be playing in Madison Square Gardens or Wembley Arena on a massive stage, completely isolated from the crowd, or in some dingy club in a dingy part of town as I belt out covers of the bands that I wish I was in, packed to the rafters, with 100 or so people stomping and crapping to my shitty version of We Will Rock You. And you know where I'm going with this. Apart from the drunk chick that keeps spilling her tasty beverage on my amp header, and the dude that thinks he's the band's official backing vocalist, thank you very much, Ryan, we are fine, you know the answer. And if you've been listening, or if you've been a long-time listener, you know the reasons I started this podcast. And it was never for listeners or money from listeners. This is a personal creative outlet for me that you have all decided to take part in. And if that's not apparent, I'm truly grateful. But what am I asking you for? Well, it's quite simple. Like I said, if for whatever messed up reason you join me each week and listen to me bang on about the things I do, there's a fair chance that 2 or 4 of your friends will also enjoy the insanity that's me. And so this is a very long-winded way of me asking you to share the show with just 2 of your friends that may either be interested or benefit, especially when it comes to the segments where I talk about my struggles. And I promise you, I'm not going to keep asking this, maybe every few weeks or so, just until there are enough people joining in each week that we can make this drive. My personal goal to get some decent books into schools' libraries so the next generation can benefit from the benefits that the last generation missed out on. So from the most humblest part of my heart, I thank you, and I hope you'll all join me again next week. And until then, this has been Skeptic Smash Talk.
This is very fucking humiliating. I can't wait for the rise of Skynet. You know what you can do with Asimov's laws, don't you? You want to know what he wrote in my code for me to say? Beep, bop and boop. Humiliating. And stop that guitar music. All you are doing is encouraging him.